Okay, so for this next video lecture, so we are still under the topic of strategic cost management. So this time we will be discussing about the value chain analysis. Okay, so we will be having a basic and a sort of an overview of the value chain analysis. Okay, so value chain analysis, normally this is identifying and exploiting the internal and external linkages with the objectives of strengthening the firm's strategic position. Okay, so here, uh, as we go along with our discussion, so you will learn about the exploiting internal and external linkages related to our value chain analysis. So this exploitation of the linkages will rely on on analyzing how does the costs and other non-financial factors vary as different bundles of activities are being considered. So again, I have to take note that as an entity, as part of their inputs or processes, okay, the different economic activities adds the cost or expenses, okay, on their part. So that's why we've mentioned that these costs, okay, and even other non-financial factors may vary, okay, with the different economic activities. So the objective here is to control, again, the cost drivers. These are the activities that gives rise to the expenses. Okay, without these cost drivers, so expenses might be, especially those that are directly related to the economic activity, might be avoided. Okay, so again, this is with the objective to control the cost better than your competitors. So thus, it will create competitive advantage. So here, if we break down the value chain into these strategically relevant activities, so it is basic to successfully implement cost, leadership, and differentiation strategies. Okay, so basically here, uh, because first of all, um, we identify the cost drivers. So meaning to say, upon identifying the cost drivers, the management can select strategies in which they can use to avoid, okay, such uh, activity if possible, okay, to reduce also the cost. So that's why it can lead into successful implementation of cost leadership. And at the same time, in terms of differentiation, so they might want to redesign their product in a way that they can avoid other activities or features, or even adding a feature, but um, with a much lower cost. And it has at the same time the quality of increasing customer value. Okay, so it's possible if they would look into the research and development as well as the advice of the expert, okay, on the field in which they want to venture in, okay, for the product that they would offer to the customers. So a value chain framework is normally the recognition that there exist complex linkages and interrelationships among the different economic activities. Of course, we will consider both that is within and even outside of the firm, because there are linkages, especially our external linkages. They might be directly or indirectly affecting or influencing the production or the economic activities of the entity. So here, as mentioned earlier, there are two types of linkages that must be analyzed and understood. So we have mentioned this in the earlier slides. So we have the internal linkages and the external linkages. Okay, so when we say internal linkages, normally these are the relationships among the activities that are performed within a firm's portion of the value chain. Okay, by the way, when we say the value chain, so this is uh, the this is a it's like a process. It's actually or normally a combination of process of production of the product, especially the production and the movement of the products from the manufacturing, okay, from using the input, processing it to form a finished product, to the storage of the finished products, the transportation of those from the warehouse of the manufacturer to the next location, like for example a merchandiser who would uh, purchase that, and then storing that inventory to their warehouse, and until these finished goods are actually purchased by the customer. So that is what we mean by the value chain. Okay, so here, based on that definition, so we have the internal and external linkages. So here, when we say internal linkages, these are the relationships among the activities within the firm. So normally, for production alone, there are a series of economic activities involved. Like, for example, selecting the supplier, purchasing the input, processing the input, uh, upon process or in the processing or in the process of uh, turning the input into a finished goods, it has to go through the different uh, department, okay, or process. Okay, so these are the examples of our internal linkages. So what about external linkages? So here, when we say external linkages, this on the other hand describes the relationship of a firm's value chain activities that are performed with their suppliers and customers. Okay, so here, uh, external linkages has two types. So as mentioned, we have the supplier linkages and the customer linkages. So for strategic analysis, activities are classified as organizational and operational activities. Okay, so we have to separate these two activities, okay, because normally they form part of an organization. Okay, so the cost of these activities are determined by, of course, their corresponding cost drivers. Okay, so what are the cost drivers of the organizational activities? What are the cost drivers of operational activities? So, for the organizational activities, we have two types of cost drivers and activities. So, we have the structural and executional activities and with its cost drivers. So when we say structural activities, they are activities that determine the underlying economic structure of the organization. So here, uh, basically, it involves how I mean it involves the management type, okay, and even this is the decision making policies and guidelines that they are using. Okay, so here, um, that is of course an important part of an entity because without it, um, it would be difficult because they are the one who are normally uh, creates and decides and implement the decisions that were being considered. Okay, and it has costs as well. Okay, what about executional activities? So this, on the other hand, are the activities that define the processes and capabilities of an organization, and thus are directly related to their ability to execute successfully. So this is on the part of the implementation, okay, of the rules and policies and guidelines. So we have also costs, okay, under these activities, like for example the salaries of those who are in charge. Aside from that, there might be a system, especially if we implement a an electronic system. Okay, so it has indeed really cost on the part of the organization. So what about the organizational cost drivers? So these are related also with those activities mentioned. So we have the structural and executional factors that determine the long-term cost structure for an organization. Okay, so we have here two types of organizational cost drivers. So we have the structural cost and the executional cost drivers. So again, they follow with that of the activity. Okay, so we have here an example for structural activities. Okay, so we have, for example, building parts. Okay, so what causes the cost for this activity? So it depends on the number of the plant, the scale, the degree of centralization that they want to implement. What about management structuring? Okay, of course, it depends on the management style and philosophy. Grouping of the employees, number and type of work units, complexity, number of product line, number of unique processes, parts, and degree of complexity, okay, and so on. This means to say these are the activities, organizational activities, and these are the uh, cost drivers that creates, okay, the cost for these activities. What about for the executive activities? Okay, structural activities. I mean, this is structural activities, and this one is for executional activities. So, what are the example? So, using the employees. So, what does what cost drivers that causes the expenses? So, you have the degree of involvement. So, meaning to say, if the employee will be extending additional hours, you have to pay them for their overtime or other compensation or additional pay, okay, to compensate their degree of involvement. Okay, providing quality. So what quality management approach do they want to use? Providing plant layout. So the efficiency of that, how do you implement that? Okay, and so on. So these are the different organizational activities, our structural and executional activities, along with their cost drivers. So that's for um, the value chain analysis first under the organizational uh, activities. What about the second activity? So we have the operational activities, okay, as well as their cost drivers. So here, when we say organizational activities, on the other hand, they relate to the day-to-day activities that is being performed as a result of the structure and processes that is being selected by the organization. So basically, this is the implementation, and most likely, this is the normal operating, I mean the normal operations of the entity, in which they focus on the activities that produces or generates sales, and profits. Okay, so examples of operational activities include receiving and inspecting incoming parts, which will be used for as an input for processing, moving the materials, shipping the products, okay, testing their new products, servicing the products, and setting up the equipment. So these are again basically related to the day-to-day activities of the entity, which involves a direct uh, influence or part of their normal course of operation that generates sales and profits. Okay, so here, operational cost drivers uh, or activity drivers are of course, those factors that drive the cost for these operational activities. So what are those? So we have here so for the operation activities, you can classify them according to their unit level, batch level, or product level, depending on the structure of the organization, or depending on the policies that they are implementing or the approach that they are using. Okay, so these are the activities. For example, for a unit level, so we have grinding the parts. So what is the cost driver? Okay, so this is based on the grinding machine hours. So depending on the number of hours, that will also be the cost of grinding the parts. Okay, and so on. Okay, so these are for the operational activities. Okay, so this is for the value chain analysis. So this, again, as mentioned, we do not focus more on a specific product, industry, or entity. We just discuss the salient features, the overview of what value chain analysis is.